Use your phone. It's in your lap right there.
I just don't want to put my hands down. I'm really sorry.
You're just really wrong.
No. I've just been way too many videos of problems.
But you're not black. Remember, we only kill black people. Yeah, we only kill black people, right? All the videos you've seen, have you seen any white people get killed?
Hey YouTube, it's your boy TSB here, back with another video. So this is going to be a little more of a serious video based on some recent events that have transpired. So this has been in the news lately. So there was a cop, so this happened back in 2016, back in July. A cop down in Cobb County, Georgia was recorded on the dash cam saying that they only kill black people. So that has resurfaced recently, as there has been determination as to what would happen to him in terms of his job and his career, and he's been forced to retire. But I want to address some of the issues surrounding this and take somewhat of a personal but also a psychological perspective to address this. So this cop, Lieutenant Greg Abbott, he was the context of the stop is that there was a young lady, I don't know what her ethnicity was, but she was in a car and she was inebriated, and she was concerned about her safety when he pulled her over. So she had her hands on the steering wheel and she didn't want to take them down to take herself out of her lap, and due to her concern about this, to try to assuage her, to make her feel more comfortable with engaging the behavior that he wanted her to, he made a joke. And the joke was, well, remember, we only kill black people, right? So have you seen those videos? Have you seen any white people getting killed? And so she said yes, actually, but so she was still concerned. And so he was using that as his way of trying to calm her down, and even though it didn't really calm her down. So first and foremost, it's clear that the guy made a mistake. So I'm not defending him. I'm not saying that it was okay, but what I'm saying is that he did make a mistake. And I'm sure that most people on some level had said something probably inappropriate or that they shouldn't have said. And maybe most people don't really have video cameras watching them, and they don't have the same type of lashback that has fallen upon him and ultimately resulted in his probably forced retirement. So that's one thing. You know, one thing that was interesting, so in one of the videos that I watched, you hear the police chief saying, well, I don't know what's in his heart.
I don't know what's in his heart, but I certainly know what came out of his mouth.
Well, that's an interesting statement that he makes, because both from just a human standpoint and a psychological standpoint, even outside of both of those. So we're dealing with Georgia, Cobb County, and the Bible Belt. So if we're talking about the Bible Belt, let's talk religion for some of y'all who are out there. So the Bible says what comes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart. What does that mean? It means that the things that you focus on, that you meditate from, the things that you really think about a lot, are the things that you're going to be talking about. And actually, we find these similar things in the field of psychology. So people are much more readily able to talk about the things that they believe very strongly, or the things that they really subscribe to. And one thing is really important, because we have people who are trying to defend this guy, saying that it was a joke. And so there's two levels that I have that are concerning about this. So one, that people are trying to defend this as a joke because I don't think they really understand what it means where they're trying to defend this as a joke. So what does that communicate? It communicates that the lives that he's joking about in terms of killing black people are expendable. If you can joke about something as serious as killing people, referring to a race of people, what we would call a race of people, that we can joke about this and this is okay, then we're communicating that these lives do not matter. And this is really the whole basis of movements like Black Lives Matter. And I think that maybe people might be able to understand a little better when you look at this, that if we can joke and say that it's okay to joke about the lack of importance of a group of people's lives, then it suggests that maybe those lives aren't perceived to matter as much as lives of others. So if somebody else, so somebody in the uniform, makes a similar statement about, let's say babies. So, we only kill babies. That sounds kind of strange and shocking. But the thing is that it's not strange and shocking to you when somebody says, we only kill black people. And so part of the problem is that it's not equally shocking to you for somebody to say, we only kill babies because they're defenseless, or we only kill babies because we don't like them. But it is not shocking when someone says we only kill black people. And so that's part of the problem. And so movements like Black Lives Matter are built on this premise that there are things, this happened last year. Let's remind you that this happened last year, July 2016, that this person was on video making a joke about this. And so this is part of that factor. So I'm just trying to kind of give a little bit of context for this and movements such as that. But let's move on forward. So one of the issues here is that it points to a lack of training and a lack of sensitivity on the part of the officer. So even if I'm not saying that he holds some type of explicit or implicit bias against people of color or black people, it does point to a lack of training and sensitivity. And this is a problem in of itself, because a lack of training means that you probably are not going to address sensitive situations, so stops such as this one, in which somebody is, fearing for their safety, fearing for their life in an appropriate manner. And that can mean various levels on which they're going to be acting in a way that may not be appropriate or professional. So that's one level, so training and sensitivity. And it also points to the possibility for implicit and explicit biases that may be really impactful on the officer's interactions with the civilian, with the population at wide. So that's something that we'll come to again a little later. But one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video is why I'm afraid of the police. And so this is not an attack on the police, because the police are necessary, they're important, and I know there are a lot of good police officers. Some of my best friends are police officers. See how I took that? See how I went there? But no, we need the police, and they're important. And so it's not primarily, my fear is not primarily or even solely related to this video. I don't know if you've heard, the news for the past couple of hundred years, but there's been not the greatest relationship between the African American and black community and the police. So this is not new news. This is something that has been an issue for quite some time. So it's been a rocky relationship for quite a while now, and this is just a manifestation of that there are still things that need to be addressed and things that need to be sorted out and healed. But the first and foremost, actually the really biggest thing from my standpoint as a psychologist is that they're human. And you say, well, that's not fair. That's not fair to say that they're human. That's kind of not an overstatement, but I use that for effect because of the fact that they are human. They are prone to some of the similar mistakes that any other human makes. And that's fine. We're not going to say that they can't make mistakes, but part of the problem is that they need to be held to a higher standard. So as you may have realized from some of what I've talked about in my videos before, I'm part of a military. And as part of the military, I kind of have an understanding of this idea of being held to a higher standard. So one of the things I will say is that the military is not perfect. There are faults and problems within the military that are being addressed, and we are working on every day to address these appropriately. But one of the struggles I have is that oftentimes it does not seem that the police force across the country, and there's so many jurisdictions, and they have their own their ability to judge themselves to deal with their issues internally, but it does not seem necessarily like they're held to the higher standard in the same way that the military tries to hold itself to a higher standard. So one of the reasons why this is concerning for me is that when something like this happens, and maybe something worse, he actually engages in an act that ultimately has a really negative outcome for the person. Maybe the person's injured or killed. I don't necessarily see it. I don't see that that standard that they're held to is significantly higher. And so I will say that, of course, I'm not in the police, and I am not able to see their internal processes. But what I do see is that sometimes the evidence that's presented to the public, which is sometimes one-sided, and sometimes there's other factors in, and I can't say if I've seen all the evidence, but what is presented suggests that there is not necessarily the level of punishment that might be warranted based on some of the things that are going on. And so that's a difficult thing to say. That's a really difficult topic. So I can't completely fault the police because I don't know their processes, but I can say that what we do see in the military that we may not always see in the police is that we tend to overreact. We tend to go even further in one direction when we're trying to correct for problems in the military. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing, because that's a way to start changing a culture. When you are too tepid, when you're too lackadaisical about how you're approaching problems such as racial profiling and violence against people, then it's hard to start changing the culture around it, such as allowing a person to make a comment like, "Remember, we only kill black people." So that's an important factor. So in terms of being human, it's I say that in jest, but one of the things that we have to think about is the fact that they are still human, and as human, they are still vulnerable to certain tendencies that others are prone to. So let's look at some research that that's available out in the world. So in March of this year, there were a series of studies that were published, about 7 of them, and they were looking at the perceptions of people, how they perceived black men. And ultimately, the research showed that black men are perceived as bigger, taller, heavier, or muscular, and ultimately more capable of harm than younger white men. And it was a pretty well done and well controlled study. They even controlled for physical strength and ability and size. And they used public records that could be found by anybody. And what they found is that regardless of control for physiological strength, size, heaviness, what they found is that that darker colored skin, and black people in particular, were perceived as all these things: bigger, stronger, scarier, more of a threat than their Caucasian counterparts. So this is something that we have to realize, that the police are also vulnerable to. This is not something that they are immune from. And so this also, when I talked earlier about the fact that training is an issue, training is something that can help with some of these things. The way that we perceive people, the more we address these types of issues, and I think that there's probably not adequate training being done in the police departments as of yet, but the more we address these issues, we probably can start to improve some things like these perceptions. And so that's just on one level. On another level, we know that there are these things called implicit and explicit biases, and Harvard is doing some good research on these for quite some time. And most people don't probably even know what implicit and explicit biases are. But essentially, what an implicit bias is a bias that a person holds that they may not be consciously aware of. So implicit biases are biases that kind of cause us to act almost automatically. Whereas explicit biases are the biases that people hold that are well known, that they can verbalize very easily. And so when we look at implicit and explicit biases, we know that we all hold them. This is not something that some people have, some people don't have. Everybody has implicit and explicit biases. But the implicit biases, what I'm more interested here, is because as humans, and holding the fact that we hold implicit biases means that there are going to be some things and some people, maybe some groups, that we may have more negative opinions of. And these more negative opinions may cause us to act in a more negative way much more quickly than we would have otherwise. And these are things that can change. That's something in the research that we're still working on developing. There doesn't seem to be, excuse me, a lot of really good interventions for improving these implicit biases, but that's just something to realize, is that we know that due to explicit biases, people may be more likely to see African Americans, black men in particular, as more threatening, more harmful. But then in terms of implicit biases, that can also make somebody even more likely to act in a way that may be dangerous. And so when I think about my own fear, is that, you know, regardless of what I say, regardless of my educational background, regardless of my military affiliation, I have a police officer walking into my car. I know that due to some basic ways that we perceive the world and that we process the world on a very quick and automatic basis, that person is much more likely to see me as a danger and as a threat, even if I'm in a relatively passive manner. Even if I'm not raising my voice, even if I'm not posturing in a way that is threatening, there are going to be some things that make it more likely that I'm going to be seen as dangerous. And so that is part of what, even just as a psychologist, not even as a black man, as a psychologist, I do have a heightened level of fear for my interaction with the police. You know, I'm nothing other than respectful for police when they approach my car, if they approach my car for some reason, not just because of fear, but also because of the fact that I respect them. And, you know, law enforcement, military, there's respect that I have there for. That's a stressful job and it's a difficult job. And if you think about the stress of that job as a police officer, on top of potential biases and potential perceptions that may be skewed negatively towards somebody who looks like me, there are a lot of things that make it a potentially scary situation for a person of color. So, you know, this has been a long video, and if you made it to this far, thank you for listening. I appreciate you, and I don't want anybody to see this as a bashing of the police. You know, I love the police, and they're important. We need them for the communities, but we do need to work on our relationship with the police. There's training that needs to be done. I think the police would agree with that. There's training that needs to be done. And I think that maybe we as psychologists, we as the mental health field, can do some things to help with, you know, conflict resolution and other issues that can help the relationship between the society as a whole, and our police departments. So hopefully this hasn't completely turned you all off, but I think it's an important discussion for us to have. So please comment down below, drop me a like, subscribe to this channel for more. But I love you guys, and I'm not trying to sow any type of discontent or discord, but there's some things that we do need to talk about, and we have to be able to have open conversation with them if we're going to continue to improve and make this nation of ours as great as it can be. So this is TSP out, and hopefully we can make your tomorrow better than today. Have a nice day.